The Galactic Defense Academy had seen many species pass through its halls over the centuries. Tall, graceful Altarians with their crystalline wings, the hulking Krathen with their stone-like skin and methodical thinking, even the mysterious Voidborn who seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. But never had the instructors seen anything quite like the human who walked through the academy doors that morning. Lieutenant Sarah Chen moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost predatory. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held intensity that made even the veteran Krathen instructors step aside. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already proven themselves in ways that mattered. Commander Zethkar, the Academy's chief instructor, studied her file on his holographic display. The information was sparse, almost suspiciously so. Born on Earth's colony world of New Shanghai, graduated top of her class from the Terran Naval Academy, served aboard the TNS Redemption during what the humans called the Asteroid Belt Incident. The details of that incident were classified, at levels that even Zethkar couldn't access. What intrigued him most was her call sign, Ghost. The name had already begun circulating through the Academy's networks before she'd even reported for duty. Somehow, word had spread from the outer rim colonies to the core worlds. Pilots who had never met her spoke her name with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Veterans of a dozen campaigns would pause their conversations when someone mentioned the Ghost. Sarah stood at attention in Zethkar's office, her posture perfect, despite having traveled for 3 weeks through hyperspace to reach the Academy. The commander's four eyes studied her carefully, looking for any sign of the legendary pilot hidden beneath the regulation uniform. "Your file is remarkably thin for someone with your reputation," Zethkar rumbled, his translator rendering his words in perfect standard. "Care to explain how a recent Academy graduate earned a call sign that has half the galaxy's pilots talking?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "I do my job, sir. Nothing more, nothing less." The commander's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "Your modesty is noted, Lieutenant. However, doing one's job doesn't typically result in distress calls from hegemony battlecruisers requesting immediate evacuation." A flicker of something passed through Sarah's eyes, but she remained silent. Zethkar leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across his desk. "The hegemony doesn't ask for help, Lieutenant. They demand it. They take it or they destroy whatever stands in their way. They don't send coded transmissions begging for extraction from a human pilot they've never heard of." The situation was complicated, sir. Complicated. The commander's secondary arms gestured at the holographic display showing Sarah's file. The hegemony's Third Fleet engaged unknown hostiles in the Kepler 442 system. 17 battlecruisers, 43 destroyers, and over 200 fighter craft. When the dust settled, only 4 ships remained functional. The fleet commander's final transmission mentioned a human pilot who somehow managed to extract their command staff from the middle of the engagement zone. Sarah shifted slightly, the first sign of discomfort she'd shown. The hostiles were using quantum disruption fields. Standard navigation was impossible. I happen to have experience with similar conditions. Experience. Zethkar's voice carried a note of skepticism. "You're 24 standard years old. You graduated from the Terran Naval Academy 8 months ago. Your official combat experience consists of routine patrol missions and asteroid mapping surveys. Where exactly did you gain experience with quantum disruption fields?" The silence stretched between them. Outside the office's viewport, other Academy students moved between training facilities, their various forms creating a colorful tapestry against the station's metallic corridors. Sarah watched them for a moment before speaking. "My father was a deep space surveyor. He used to take me on mapping runs when I was young. We encountered some unusual phenomena in the outer systems. It was a carefully crafted non-answer, and both of them knew it." Zethkar made a note on his display and stood, his full height towering over the human. "Your first assignment will be with Squadron 7. They're running combat simulations in the Xerion Nebula analog. Try not to embarrass the other students too badly." Sarah saluted crisply. "Yes, sir." As she turned to leave, Zethkar spoke again. "Lieutenant Chen, the Academy's records show that you requested assignment here specifically. Most pilots of your caliber prefer active duty postings. Why are you really here?" Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the activation panel. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something that might have been pain or regret. Because I have things to learn, sir, and things to teach. After she left, Zethkar pulled up the classified reports from the Kepler 442 incident. The details were fragmentary, cobbled together from sensor readings and survivor testimonials. An unknown alien fleet had appeared without warning, wielding technology that defied conventional understanding. Their ships moved through space in ways that violated known physics, phasing in and out of reality like ghosts. The hegemony's response had been typical, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. It should have been enough. It should have been more than enough. Instead, their fleet had been systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. Then, according to the reports, a single human fighter had entered the engagement zone. Moving through the chaos with impossible precision, it had somehow navigated the quantum disruption fields that were tearing apart capital ships. The pilot had extracted key personnel from 3 different vessels, including the fleet commander himself, all while under fire from weapons that bent the laws of physics. The human ship had vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind only censor, ghosts and a mystery that had the galaxy's military analysts working overtime. Zethkar closed the file and looked out at the training grounds where his newest student was, already running diagnostics on a practice fighter. Whatever Sarah Chen had learned in the outer dark, whatever had earned her the call sign that made veteran pilots whisper in respect, she had brought it here to the academy. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what she had to teach. In the hangar bay, Sarah strapped herself into the cockpit of a standard training fighter. The other members of Squadron 7 watched her with barely concealed curiosity. Word traveled fast in a closed environment like the academy, and everyone had heard the rumors about the human who'd somehow earned legendary status before most cadets learned to dock properly. She ignored their stares and focused on the pre-flight checklist. The familiar routine of switches and displays helped center her thoughts, pushing away memories of darkness between stars and things that moved in ways that hurt to perceive. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over while her mind wandered to the real reason she'd come to the academy. Out there in the deep black, something was stirring. The attack on the hegemony fleet had been just the beginning, a test of the galaxy's defenses, and Sarah Chen, call sign Ghost, was perhaps the only pilot alive who understood what was coming. The Zirian Nebula simulation chamber hummed with barely contained energy as Squadron 7 prepared for their first joint exercise. The other cadets had been training together for months, their movements synchronized through countless hours of practice. Sarah Chen was the unknown variable, the human who had disrupted their carefully balanced unit. Cadet Vexnari, a proud Altarian whose crystalline wings caught and refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, approached Sarah's fighter with obvious skepticism. Her species had dominated aerial combat for millennia before achieving spaceflight, and she carried that arrogance like a badge of honor. Human, Vexnari's melodic voice carried clearly across the comm channel. I trust you can keep up with real pilots. This isn't some backwater human colony where slow reflexes are acceptable. Sarah finished her final systems check before responding. I'll do my best not to hold you back. The other squadron members exchanged glances that spoke volumes. KX, a methodical Krathan whose species thought in geological timescales, rumbled his disapproval. Disruption of established unit cohesion leads to decreased efficiency. This exercise should be postponed until proper integration protocols are completed. Zara, the hot-headed Pirathi whose scales shifted color with her emotions, flared bright orange with anticipation. Let the human prove herself. Better to discover weaknesses in simulation than in actual combat. Flight leader Toxani, a seasoned Voidborn whose form seemed to shift between dimensions, called for silence. Enough, we have our mission parameters. Squadron 7 will navigate the nebula simulation while engaging multiple hostiles. The objective is to reach the extraction point with all members intact. The simulation chamber transformed around them, walls dissolving into the swirling chaos of the Zirion Nebula. Electromagnetic storms crackled through clouds of superheated gas, creating a maze of hazardous passages that could fry unshielded electronics in seconds. Sensor interference was so severe that pilots had to rely on visual contact and instinct more than instruments. Form up on me, Toxani ordered, his ship taking point as they entered the nebula. Standard Delta formation. Watch for sensor ghosts and energy fluctuations that don't match the environmental patterns. The squadron moved forward in perfect formation, their ships weaving between plasma streams and electromagnetic barriers. Sarah held position at the rear, observing how each pilot adapted to the challenging environment. Vexnari flew with artistic grace, her movements flowing like a dancer. KX was methodical and precise, calculating every maneuver before executing it. Zara was aggressive, pushing the limits of her ship's capabilities to thread impossible gaps. 20 minutes into the exercise, their first contacts appeared on the scope. Enemy fighters, moving in attack patterns that seemed designed to herd the squadron toward the nebula's most dangerous regions. Multiple bogies, bearing 27 Mark IV, Toxani announced. Vexnari, take high. KX, go low. Zara, you're with me on approach. Ghost, maintain overwatch and... Flight leader. Sarah interrupted, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Those aren't standard attack patterns. They're herding us toward grid reference 77 Alpha. Toxani's form flickered with confusion. Explain. Sarah's fighter broke formation, accelerating toward what appeared to be empty space. The enemy knows this environment better than we do. Those plasma streams we've been avoiding. They're not random. Someone's been mapping the safe passages and they want us to follow a specific route. Impossible, Vexnari protested. This is a simulation based on real nebula conditions. The electromagnetic patterns are too chaotic for... Her words were cut off as Sarah's fighter vanished into what looked like a solid wall of plasma. For several seconds, there was only static on the comm channel. Then her voice returned, strangely distorted but clear. There's a hidden passage here. The plasma wall is only about 50 meters thick. Beyond it is a clear corridor that leads directly to their command ship. The squadron stared at their displays in disbelief. According to their sensors, Sarah's fighter had simply ceased to exist. There was no way to penetrate that level of electromagnetic interference and survive. Ghost, confirm your status, Toxani demanded. I'm fine. The passage is narrow but navigable. You'll need to disable your active sensors and rely on passive detection only. The electromagnetic field will mask your approach. KX's massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his cockpit. This violates standard tactical doctrine. We should maintain formation and engage the enemy according to established protocols. Sarah's fighter emerged from the plasma wall like a ghost materializing from the void. Her ship showed no signs of damage despite having passed through enough electromagnetic energy to melt hull plating. Standard doctrine assumes the enemy plays by the same rules we do, she said. Sometimes you have to think differently. Before anyone could respond, the simulation's enemy fighters launched their primary assault. Dozens of craft poured out of concealed positions throughout the nebula, their weapons filling space with deadly energy. The squadron found themselves surrounded, cut off from retreat by the very plasma streams they'd been using for cover. All fighters. Defensive pattern beta, Toxani ordered. But Sarah was already moving. Her fighter accelerated into the heart of the enemy formation, twisting through weapon fire with movements that seemed to defy physics. She slipped between attacking craft like smoke, her guns targeting not the enemy ships themselves but the nebula's structure around them. Precisely placed shots destabilized plasma pockets, creating cascade reactions that sent electromagnetic pulses rippling through the enemy formation. Their advanced targeting systems, overwhelmed by the sudden interference, began firing wildly at false contacts. What is she doing? Vexnari whispered, watching in amazement as Sarah turned the nebula itself into a weapon. Learning the environment, Zara observed, her scales shifting to deep purple with respect. She's not fighting the nebula or the enemy. She's making them fight each other. Within minutes, the enemy formation was in chaos. Ships that had relied on sophisticated sensors found themselves blind and confused, firing at shadows while the real threats slipped past their defenses. Sarah moved through the confusion like a predator, systematically eliminating key targets while the rest of the squadron provided supporting fire. When the simulation ended, the results spoke for themselves. Squadron 7 had achieved total victory with 0 casualties, completing the mission in record time, but it was the method that left everyone speechless. In the debriefing room, Commander Zethkar studied the tactical recordings with intense focus. The other instructors murmured among themselves, reviewing footage that challenged everything they thought they knew about nebula combat. Cadet Chen, the commander said finally, your approach was highly unorthodox. Care to explain your tactical reasoning? Sarah stood at attention, her expression neutral. The enemy had superior numbers and position, sir. Conventional tactics would have resulted in acceptable losses but poor mission completion time. I identified an environmental factor that could be exploited to equalize the engagement. Environmental factor. Zethkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You treated the nebula as a tactical asset rather than an obstacle. Yes, sir. Vexenari stepped forward, her crystalline wings folded with newfound respect. I owe you an apology, Ghost. Your flying today was extraordinary. The other squadron members nodded agreement. Even KX, despite his species' resistance to rapid tactical changes, rumbled his approval. Efficient. Unconventional, but efficient. But Toxani remained silent, his shifting form betraying deep thought. As a Voidborn, he understood better than most what it meant to exist partially outside normal space. What he'd witnessed today went beyond unconventional tactics. Sarah hadn't just used the nebula's electromagnetic properties. She'd somehow sensed them in ways that should have been impossible for any known species. After the other cadets were dismissed, Toxani approached Sarah in the hangar bay where she was running post-flight diagnostics on her fighter. That passage through the plasma wall, he said without preamble. How did you know it was there? Sarah paused in her work, tools still in hand. Electromagnetic patterns create resonance frequencies. If you know what to look for, you can identify structural weaknesses. That's not what I'm asking. Toxani's form solidified, becoming more corporeal than usual. I've flown through the real Xerian Nebula. I know its patterns. That passage shouldn't exist in the simulation because it doesn't exist in reality. Their eyes met across the narrow cockpit. For a moment, Sarah's carefully maintained composure flickered, revealing depths that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent age. Maybe the simulation knows something about the real nebula that the charts don't, she said quietly. Toxani studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Perhaps it does. Just remember, Ghost, some knowledge comes with a price. Make sure you're prepared to pay it. As he faded from view, returning to whatever dimension the Voidborn called home, Sarah returned to her diagnostics. But her hands moved automatically, while her mind wandered to the deep spaces between stars, where things moved in patterns that most minds couldn't comprehend. The simulation had been more accurate than anyone realized. The Quiet Recruit. Part 3. 3 months into training, Maya had become something of an enigma among the recruits. She consistently scored at the bottom of physical fitness tests, couldn't match the strength or speed of her alien companions, and barely qualified on standard marksmanship ranges. Yet somehow she never lost a tactical exercise. Major Kretal found himself in the unusual position of having a recruit who defied every metric he understood. Traditional military doctrine suggested Maya should have washed out weeks ago. Instead, she had become the most effective problem solver in the entire training battalion. The turning point came during the impossible scenario exercise, a simulation designed to have no winning solution. It was meant to teach recruits how to face inevitable defeat with courage and maintain unit cohesion under hopeless circumstances. The scenario placed a squad of 10 recruits in a damaged starship, systems failing, enemy forces closing in, with no hope of escape or rescue. Previous classes had demonstrated heroic last stands, touching sacrifice and inspiring leadership in the face of certain doom. That was the point. Maya's squad found themselves in the simulator's replica of a crippled cruiser. Lights flickered, artificial gravity fluctuated, and warning klaxons blared constantly. Their briefing was simple. Hold position for as long as possible against overwhelming enemy forces. Squad leader Vask immediately began organizing defensive positions. Thrumgar, take the main corridor. Senna, you're our mobile scout, Maya. He paused, still uncomfortable with giving the human meaningful assignments. You monitor communications. Maya nodded and moved to the communication station, but her real attention was on the ship's diagnostic displays that everyone else had ignored. While her squad mates prepared for a glorious last stand, she quietly accessed the damage reports and system schematics. The enemy forces began their assault 20 minutes into the exercise. Simulated plasma bolts filled the corridors as alien Marines advanced on their position. Vask's defensive strategy was textbook perfect, utilizing each squad member's natural advantages to maximum effect. But Maya wasn't fighting. She was deep in the ship's computer systems, tracing power conduits and analyzing damage reports. What she found there changed everything. "Vask," she called out during a brief lull in the fighting. "I need 5 minutes and someone to cover me." "We're in the middle of a battle, human. There's no time for whatever technical nonsense you're planning." "The ship isn't as damaged as the initial reports indicated," Maya continued calmly, even as enemy fire resumed around them. "Someone sabotaged the diagnostics to make us think the situation was hopeless." This got Vask's attention. "What are you talking about?" Maya's fingers flew across the control interfaces, bringing up displays that showed her analysis. "Look at these power distribution patterns. The main engines aren't destroyed, they're just offline. The navigation system is functional but locked out. Even life support is actually stable, despite what the warning messages say." "That's impossible," Vask clicked. "The instructors wouldn't lie about the scenario parameters." "They wouldn't lie," Maya agreed. "But they might simulate realistic sabotage. What if this isn't a test of how we handle defeat? What if it's a test of whether we can recognize when defeat is artificially manufactured?" The fighting intensified around them, but Maya continued her work. She traced every system failure, every diagnostic error, every supposedly irreparable malfunction, and one by one she found the digital fingerprints of sabotage. "Senna," she called to the Zephyrian, "I need you to reach the engine control room. There's a manual override that can restart the main drive. But the corridor leading there is completely overrun with enemy forces." "No, it's not. Look at this tactical display. The enemy forces are concentrated exactly where our defensive doctrine says they should be, but there's a maintenance route that bypasses them completely." While her squad continued their defensive battle, Maya guided Senna through the ship's hidden pathways. The young Zephyrian's natural agility made her perfect for navigating the narrow service corridors Maya had identified. 20 minutes later, the ship's main engines rumbled back to life. "Impossible," Vask shouted over the sound of restored power systems. "The engines were destroyed!" "No," Maya replied, now working on the navigation systems. "They were disabled by someone who wanted us to believe they were destroyed. Thrum, I need you to manually cycle the navigation computer. There's a physical reset switch behind that panel." The massive Gornak looked confused but followed her instructions. Moments later, navigation displays flickered back to life, showing clear routes away from the enemy fleet. "Gar, can you handle the helm? I've plotted a course that uses the asteroid field to mask our escape." As the ship began to move, their simulated enemies found themselves chasing a vessel they had expected to be helpless. Maya's tactical analysis had identified weaknesses in the enemy formation that allowed them to slip through what should have been an impenetrable blockade. The simulation ended with their successful escape, something that had never happened in the history of the exercise. The debriefing room was silent as instructors reviewed the simulation data. Captain HFY, the Menthari evaluation officer, finally spoke. "In 200 years of military service, I have never seen a recruit identify and counteract scenario manipulation of this sophistication. The sabotage elements were hidden behind 7 layers of system encryption." Major Kretal looked genuinely shaken. "Chen, how did you know the scenario was manipulated?" Maya considered her answer carefully. "The damage patterns didn't make sense, sir. If the ship had really taken that kind of punishment, we should have been dead before the exercise started. The fact that we were alive meant the critical systems were still functional, just hidden." "But how did you know where to look?" "What to fix? I grew up maintaining life support systems that failed regularly. When something stops working, you trace the connections until you find where the break really is. Most of the time, it's not where you first think it is." Instructor Zakthai, a senior Hexaran tactician, leaned forward. "You're suggesting that our conventional approach to this scenario was fundamentally flawed?" "Yes, sir. Everyone assumes that when faced with overwhelming force, the only options are fight or die. But what if the overwhelming force is an illusion? What if the real battle is against the assumptions that trap you in the first place?" The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Maya had not only solved an impossible scenario, she had demonstrated that the scenario itself was based on flawed premises. That night, encrypted communications flashed between training facility commanders and Galactic Defense Force headquarters. A new kind of tactical thinking was emerging from the most unlikely source imaginable. Maya, unaware of the strategic discussions her performance had triggered, continued her quiet study routine. But she noticed that other recruits had begun watching her more carefully, asking questions about her approach to problems they had never considered solvable. The quiet recruit was developing a reputation. More importantly, she was proving that human thinking operated on principles that the galaxy's military establishment had never encountered. And in the command centers of a dozen worlds, strategic planners were beginning to wonder what other assumptions they might be wrong about. The hyperspace jump to the terminus sector should have taken 18 hours. Instead, Alpha Squadron found themselves dropped back into normal space after only 12. Their navigation computers displaying error messages that no one had seen before. The cruiser Stormbreaker materialized alongside them, its massive bulk scarred by energy patterns that seemed to shift and flow across the hull like living things. Captain Veltar's voice crackled across the comm channels, his normally steady tone betraying concern. All fighters maintain defensive formation. Our navigation systems are showing impossible readings. According to our instruments, we're exactly where we're supposed to be, but we arrived 6 hours early. Sarah studied her displays with growing unease. The sensor readings were unlike anything in standard databases, showing energy signatures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Space itself appeared to be warped around the missing colony systems, creating gravitational anomalies that defied known physics. "Ghost to Stormbreaker," she transmitted on the command channel. "Request permission to conduct advanced reconnaissance. I'm reading dimensional distortions that could affect squadron safety." "Granted," Veltar replied immediately, "but maintain comm contact at all times. If these readings are accurate, we're dealing with technology that makes our most advanced systems look primitive." Sarah's fighter detached from the formation, accelerating toward the outer edge of the Terra Nova system. Behind her, Alpha Squadron held position while their sensors tried to make sense of readings that challenged everything they knew about space-time mechanics. As she approached the system's heliopause, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. Terra Nova Prime wasn't destroyed, it was displaced. The entire planet hung in space like a museum exhibit, perfectly preserved but somehow existing outside normal time flow. The star itself pulsed with unnatural rhythms, its fusion processes controlled by forces that treated stellar engineering like simple mechanics. "This is impossible," came Cadet Hexalani's voice over the squadron channel. The Zephyrian's multispectral vision could perceive electromagnetic frequencies invisible to most species, making his shock particularly significant. "The planet's temporal signature is shifting. It exists in our timeline, but also in at least 3 others simultaneously." Sarah maneuvered closer to the displaced world, her fighter's sensors struggling to process readings that contradicted basic understanding of reality. The planet's surface showed no signs of destruction or conflict. Cities remained intact, infrastructure functioned normally, and atmospheric readings indicated a perfectly habitable environment. But there were no life signs, no communications, no signs of the 2 million people who had called this world home. "They're in temporal stasis," Sarah realized, her voice carrying across the open channel. "The entire population has been suspended in a quantum bubble, alive but displaced from normal time flow." Through her fighter's viewport, she could see movement on the planet's surface. Vehicles traveled along highways, lights flickered in windows, and the massive mining operations continued their work. But everything moved with mechanical precision, like a recording played on infinite loop. "Ghost," Captain Veltar's voice carried new urgency. "We're detecting massive energy buildup at the edge of the system. Something's coming through hyperspace, but the signatures don't match any known propulsion system." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the readings appearing on her scope. The same energy patterns that had preceded the attack on the Hegemony fleet, but amplified beyond anything she'd encountered before. Whatever was approaching wasn't just another probe or harassment raid. This was a full-scale assault force. "All fighters, emergency withdrawal to minimum safe distance," she commanded, her tactical authority automatically recognized by the squadron's combat protocols. "Stormbreaker, begin charging primary weapons and prepare for contact with hostile forces utilizing non-standard physics." The space around Terra Nova Prime began to shimmer and distort as the approaching entities prepared to materialize. Reality itself seemed to bend and flex, creating visual effects that hurt to observe directly. Several squadron members reported nausea and disorientation, as their brains struggled to process images that violated fundamental assumptions about how the universe worked. When the hostile fleet finally appeared, it defied every convention of spacecraft design that the galaxy had developed over millennia of spacefaring civilization. The ships weren't built so much as grown, their organic curves flowing in patterns that suggested impossible geometries. They moved through space without visible propulsion, sliding between dimensions like predators emerging from deep water. Sensor count shows 47 vessels, reported Cadet Threcknall from his position at the squadron's sensor array. But the readings keep shifting. Sometimes I show 23, sometimes 71. It's like they're not entirely here. Sarah watched the hostile formation with the focused intensity of someone who had survived previous encounters with these entities. They weren't truly ships in any conventional sense. They were constructs that existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing them to phase in and out of reality at will. They're dimensional anchors, she explained over the tactical channel. Each construct serves as a fixed point that allows the entities to project force across multiple realities simultaneously. That's why sensor readings are inconsistent. We're only seeing the portion that exists in our dimensional framework. The lead construct began to pulse with energy that made the squadron's instruments scream warnings about radiation levels and electromagnetic interference. But instead of attacking the assembled defense force, it directed its attention toward Terra Nova Prime itself. The trapped planet began to change. Its surface rippled like water as the stasis field fluctuated, allowing glimpses of the people trapped within. For brief moments, the mechanical precision gave way to genuine human activity. Children playing in parks, workers leaving their shifts, families gathering for meals. Then the field reasserted itself, freezing everything back into temporal suspension. They're not here to destroy, Sarah realized with growing horror. They're harvesting the planet's entire population for study. Every person, every memory, every piece of human culture is being preserved for analysis. Captain Veltar's response was immediate and decisive. All weapons target the lead construct. If they want to fight, we'll give them one. Negative, Sarah countermanded, her authority as tactical advisor overriding standard combat protocols. Conventional weapons won't affect targets that exist partially outside our reality. We need a different approach. The squadron held their attack as Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. In her previous encounters with these entities, she'd survived through unconventional tactics that exploited the gaps between dimensions. But she'd always been alone, able to take risks that would be impossible with an entire squadron to protect. Stormbreaker, she transmitted. Do you have quantum resonance torpedoes in your armament? Affirmative, Veltar replied. Full spread available, but I've never seen deployment authorization for dimensional targets. Consider it authorized, Sarah said grimly. Those torpedoes are designed to destabilize subspace rifts. If we can modulate their frequency to match the construct's dimensional anchoring system, we might be able to force them back into normal space where conventional weapons can affect them. It was a desperate gambit based on theoretical physics that most of the galaxy's scientists considered impossible. But Sarah had spent years studying her father's research notes, learning to think in ways that transcended normal understanding of reality. All fighters, form up for Precision Strike Pattern Delta, she ordered. We're going to shepherd those torpedoes to their targets using coordinated sensor beams. The quantum resonance needs multiple lock-on points to achieve dimensional stability. Alpha Squadron moved into formation with practiced efficiency, their diverse backgrounds actually providing an advantage in this situation. Each species brought different sensory capabilities and technological approaches, creating a sensor web that could track targets across multiple dimensional layers. The Stormbreaker launched its spread of quantum torpedoes, each weapon pulsing with energy that existed in several realities simultaneously. Alpha Squadron's fighters surrounded the projectiles, their combined sensor arrays creating a guidance matrix that would have been impossible for any single ship to achieve. As the torpedoes approached their targets, the hostile constructs began to react. Their organic curves shifted and flowed, trying to phase completely out of normal space before the weapons could strike. But Sarah had anticipated this response, adjusting the squadron's sensor frequencies to maintain lock across dimensional boundaries. The first torpedo struck the lead construct with a flash of light that seemed to tear holes in space itself. The entity's form convulsed as it was forced back into normal reality, its impossible geometries becoming solid and vulnerable. Conventional weapons fire from the Stormbreaker found their mark, sending the creature tumbling through space in a shower of crystalline fragments. It worked. Cadet Vexnari's voice carried amazement and relief. The dimensional anchor has been severed. The construct is fully materialized in our reality. The turning point came when Sarah realized the constructs were trying to communicate. What Alpha Squadron had interpreted as attacks were actually attempts at establishing contact, using energy patterns that transcended normal electromagnetic spectra. The entities didn't understand that their method of communication was lethal to beings anchored in single-dimensional reality. "Cease fire," Sarah transmitted across all channels, her voice cutting through the chaos of battle. "All squadrons break off immediately and establish defensive perimeter at 2,000 kilometers. Captain Veltar's response was immediate and incredulous. "Ghost, those hostiles are still active and advancing. We have clear shots on 3 more constructs." "They're not hostiles," Sarah replied, maneuvering her fighter between the squadron and the approaching entities. "They're trying to talk to us. Their communication method is incompatible with our dimensional existence. But they don't realize it's killing us." Through her fighter's enhanced sensors, Sarah began to decode the energy patterns the constructs were projecting. Her father's research had touched on multidimensional communication theory, suggesting that advanced civilizations might develop information transfer methods that operated across multiple reality layers. Simultaneously, the mathematical structure underlying the signals was breathtakingly complex, encoding not just data but emotional contexts and conceptual frameworks that had no equivalent in conventional language. As Sarah's computers processed the information, a crude translation began to emerge. Curiosity, confusion, a desire for understanding that transcended species boundaries. "This is fascinating," Cadet Threknall reported from his sensor station, his voice filled with scientific wonder. "The energy patterns are modulated across 17 different dimensional frequencies. It's like they're trying to speak using the fundamental forces of reality itself." Sarah opened a return channel, modulating her fighter's comm system to broadcast on frequencies that should be detectable across dimensional boundaries. The message she sent was simple: mathematical constants that any advanced civilization would recognize, followed by basic positional data and a request for communication using electromagnetic spectra compatible with 3-dimensional entities. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The lead construct pulsed with patterns of light that formed geometric shapes in space, creating a visual language that bypassed the need for compatible dimensional frequencies. The message was complex but decipherable: acknowledgement, understanding, and an invitation to deeper communication. "They're not invaders," Sarah announced to the assembled squadron. "They're refugees. Something is hunting them across multiple dimensions, forcing them to harvest advanced civilizations for protection." The implications struck everyone simultaneously. The disappeared colonies weren't casualties of an aggressive expansion. They were being preserved in dimensional stasis fields for their own protection. The entities were desperately trying to save as many lives as possible from some greater threat. Through the visual communication system, the constructs began to share their story. They were called the Gardeners, a collective consciousness that had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. Their purpose was to preserve and protect developing civilizations, cataloging the diversity of life across countless dimensions. But something was coming, a force of pure entropy that consumed entire realities, leaving nothing but void in its wake. The Gardeners had been fleeing this enemy for eons, gathering specimens of life and culture to preserve them in protected dimensional spaces until the threat passed. The images they projected were terrifying in their scope. Entire galaxies simply ceasing to exist, their matter and energy consumed by entities that existed to unmake reality itself. The Gardeners showed how they had tried to warn other civilizations, but communication barriers had led to conflict instead of cooperation. "The Devourers," Sarah whispered, recognizing the creatures from her father's deepest research files. He had theorized about entropy entities that fed on information and complexity, reducing ordered systems to primordial chaos. The Gardener's description matched his predictions perfectly. Captain Veltar's voice carried new understanding across the comm channels. "They're trying to save us. The missing colonies, the temporal stasis fields, it's all preservation effort." But Sarah was already thinking beyond the immediate revelation. "How long do we have before the Devourers reach this galaxy?" The gardener's response came in the form of stellar charts that showed a wave of dissolution advancing across local space. Based on their projected timeline, the first scout forces would arrive within standard months, with the main assault following shortly after. "We need to warn the Galactic Defense Council immediately," Veltar decided. "This changes everything about our tactical situation." Sarah shook her head, studying the data the gardeners had provided. "Warnings won't be enough. The Devourers exist partially outside normal spacetime, just like the gardeners. Conventional military response will be about as effective as throwing rocks at a black hole." She turned her attention back to the lead construct, formulating questions about defensive strategies and survival tactics. The gardener's response painted a grim picture of previous encounters with the Devourers. Most civilizations never even realized they were under attack until entire star systems began dissolving into component particles. But there was hope. The gardeners had developed techniques for dimensional anchoring that could provide temporary protection. Large populations could be preserved in stasis while reality restructured around them. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it bought time for other strategies to develop. "They're offering to teach us," Sarah announced after decoding another complex transmission. "Dimensional manipulation, quantum stasis field generation, multi-reality communication systems, everything we need to survive what's coming." The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. The technology the gardeners offered could advance galactic civilization by millions of years overnight. But accepting it meant acknowledging that the galaxy faced an existential threat beyond anything in recorded history. Alpha Squadron remained in position around the gardener constructs while Sarah coordinated with the Stormbreaker to establish formal first contact protocols. The situation required careful handling. Humanity would likely be chosen as the primary liaison species due to their involvement in discovering the truth. But every major galactic power would want representation in the negotiations. Through continued communication, the gardeners revealed more about their preservation efforts. Each disappeared colony had been carefully studied before stasis implementation, their cultures and knowledge cataloged for future restoration. The people weren't gone. They were sleeping, waiting for the universe to become safe enough for them to wake up. "Can the process be reversed?" asked Cadet Vexnari, her crystalline features reflecting hope and concern in equal measure. The gardener's response was cautiously positive. Once the Devourer threat passed, the stasis fields could be gradually dissolved, allowing preserved populations to return to normal time flow. But the process was delicate and required precise coordination across multiple dimensional layers. Sarah found herself thinking about the strategic implications of this revelation. If the gardeners could preserve entire populations in dimensional stasis, it meant that evacuation became a viable defense strategy. But it also meant making impossible choices about who could be saved and who would have to stand and fight. "How many people can you preserve?" she asked the constructs directly. Their answer chilled her to the bone. Based on their current capabilities and the time remaining before the Devourers arrived, they could protect perhaps 1% of the galaxy's population. Everyone else would have to find alternative survival strategies or face annihilation. The numbers made the choice clear. The galaxy couldn't rely on preservation alone. They had to find a way to fight back. And that meant understanding how the Devourers operated, what weaknesses they might have, and how conventional forces could be adapted to engage enemies that existed across multiple dimensions. "We need to return to the Academy immediately," Sarah decided. "This information has to reach the Defense Council, and we need to start training programs for dimensional combat techniques." But as Alpha Squadron prepared to depart, the gardeners transmitted one final piece of information that changed everything. The Devourers weren't just a natural force of entropy. They were directed by intelligence. Somewhere in the void between realities, an entity of impossible age and malevolence was orchestrating the consumption of entire dimensions. The war for reality itself was about to begin, and humanity would stand at the center of a conflict that transcended every boundary they had ever imagined. Sarah Chen, callsign Ghost, had uncovered the truth about what lurked in the darkness between stars. Now she had to help the galaxy prepare for a battle that would determine whether ordered existence would continue, or whether everything would be reduced to primordial void. The Ghost was about to become the most important pilot in galactic history, whether she wanted the responsibility or not. As they entered hyperspace for the return journey to the Academy, Sarah stared out at the swirling energies of dimensional transit and wondered. The Quiet Recruit, Part 6. The attack on the Hegemony's impossible base required precision that pushed both technology and tactics beyond known limits. Maya's plan involved targeting specific points in their gravitational power network, creating a cascade failure that would collapse their pocket dimension and force them back into normal space where conventional weapons could reach them. Initiating Phase 1, Zix reported, his hands steady on controls that responded to gravitational fields rather than conventional thrust. The Shadow Lance maneuvered through twisted spacetime, following Maya's calculated approach vectors that threaded between gravitational anomalies. Maya worked at her sensor station, tracking energy flows that registered as barely detectable variations in local spacetime. Her analysis had identified 12 critical nodes in the Hegemony's power network. Overloading them in the correct sequence would create a resonance cascade that their own technology couldn't compensate for. First target locked, she announced quietly. Corvin, I need a precision strike on coordinates I'm transmitting. The timing window is 3 seconds. The massive Gornak's heavy weapons found their mark with surprising delicacy. The targeted node erupted in gravitational distortions that rippled through the anomaly field. Deep within their pocket dimension, the Hegemony base shuddered as power systems fluctuated. They're responding, Dr. Silith reported, her telepathic senses detecting confusion and alarm from the enemy installation. They know they're under attack, but they can't locate us through the gravitational interference. Maya's second target required the Shadow Lance to pass through a region where space itself folded back on itself. Zix's flying skills, enhanced by Maya's understanding of the power flows, guided them through impossible geometry. Target 2, Maya called out. Another precision strike, another node overloaded. The cascade was beginning. By the 5th target, the Hegemony had realized what was happening. Their defensive systems, designed to repel attacks in normal space, proved useless against Maya's approach. They couldn't defend against attacks they couldn't detect, launched from positions that shouldn't exist. Their power grid is destabilizing, Rock reported from his technical station. Whatever you did, Chen, it's working. Their gravitational field generators are going into emergency shutdown. The 6th through 11th targets fell in rapid succession. Maya's understanding of their power network allowed Beta Squad to strike with surgical precision, hitting exactly the points needed to create maximum disruption with minimum exposure to enemy fire. Final target, Maya announced as they approached the 12th node. This one will trigger the complete cascade. Once we hit it, they'll have approximately 90 seconds before their pocket dimension collapses. Corvin's shot was perfect. The last node erupted in a chain reaction that rippled through the entire gravitational field. Spacetime itself seemed to convulse as artificial gravity fields collapsed in sequence. It's working, Zix shouted as impossible geometry began to resolve into normal 3-dimensional space. The base is being pulled back into our reality. What emerged from the collapsing pocket dimension was a technological marvel that dwarfed anything in the GDF arsenal. The Hegemony Command Center was a massive installation that incorporated gravitational manipulation technology beyond current galactic understanding, but now it existed in normal space-time, vulnerable to conventional attack. All GDF vessels, this is Beta Squad. Rixtal transmitted on emergency frequencies. Target coordinates transmitted. Enemy command structure is exposed and defenseless. The response was immediate. 3 GDF fleets that had been waiting at the edge of the void drift moved in for the attack. The Hegemony's technological superiority meant nothing when their primary defensive advantage had been removed. But Maya was already analyzing new data streams from the exposed base. Wait, she called out urgently. Before the final assault, we need to capture their technical databases. This technology, it's not just advanced. It's based on principles that could revolutionize everything. Dr. Silith's telepathic probe of the base revealed panicked evacuation procedures and desperate attempts to destroy sensitive information. They're trying to wipe their computer systems. If we want that data, we need to move now. The decision fell to Commander Felnara, monitoring the battle from the stalwart. Beta Squad, you have authorization for data recovery. But make it fast. We can't hold off the final assault indefinitely. Maya's infiltration of the Hegemony base was unlike anything in GDF tactical doctrine. While her squad mates secured the perimeter, she penetrated the installation's computer networks using techniques she had developed during months of tracing information, flows and analyzing alien technology. What she found in their databases was staggering. The hegemony hadn't just developed advanced gravitational technology. They had been systematically studying and cataloging the military capabilities of every species in the galaxy, looking for weaknesses and developing specific countermeasures. But more disturbing was what she found about humanity. The hegemony had been watching human development with particular interest, not because humans were strong, but because human thinking patterns were unpredictable by their analytical models. They're afraid of us, Maya realized as she downloaded terabytes of strategic data. Not because of our physical capabilities, but because we solve problems in ways their predictive algorithms can't anticipate. The final assault on the hegemony base was swift and decisive. Deprived of their gravitational field advantages, they were no match for conventional GDF firepower. But the real victory was the intelligence Maya had captured. Her data revealed the full scope of the hegemony's strategic planning. They had been preparing for galactic conquest for decades, developing specific tactics to counter every known species' natural advantages. Every species except humans. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Sileth announced during the post-mission briefing. Their tactical databases contained detailed countermeasures for Krillian armor, Zephyrian speed, Gornak strength, Minthari telepathy, and dozens of other species' abilities. But their human analysis files are marked inconclusive and unpredictable. Commander Felnara studied the captured data with growing amazement. "Chen, your approach to this entire mission, finding patterns in gravitational fields, using power signatures for navigation, attacking their fundamental infrastructure rather than their defenses, none of this appears in their tactical predictions." Maya considered this quietly. They've been planning to fight the galaxy as it is, but they didn't account for the galaxy changing. The implications rippled through GDF command structure over the following weeks. Maya's unconventional thinking had not only solved an impossible tactical situation, but revealed a fundamental weakness in enemy strategic planning. The hegemony's greatest strength, their ability to predict and counter conventional tactics, became their greatest vulnerability when faced with genuinely innovative approaches. The recorded footage of Maya's mission required viewing at military academies throughout the galaxy. Her quiet analysis, methodical problem-solving, and refusal to accept conventional limitations represented a new kind of tactical thinking that could reshape military doctrine. But Maya herself remained unchanged. When offered promotions and commendations, she politely declined. When asked about her plans, she simply said she wanted to keep solving problems that others couldn't see. The quiet recruit had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a human who thought like a human, in a universe that had forgotten there were other ways to think. And as word of her capabilities spread through both military and civilian channels, a new understanding began to emerge. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization might not be their adaptability, or their courage, or their determination. It might be their ability to find solutions where others saw only impossible problems, to see connections that escaped even the most sophisticated analytical minds. Maya Chen had started as the smallest, quietest recruit in her training class. She had become proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was simply thinking differently. The recordings of her mission were broadcast across the galactic network, not as propaganda but as education. Every species in the galaxy watched the small human who had defeated an enemy that conventional thinking couldn't touch. And in academies, research facilities, and command centers throughout known space, the question was no longer what humans could do, but what impossible things they might accomplish when they stopped trying to think like everyone else.